The Golden Hour Birth Podcast, a podcast about real birth stories and creating connections through our shared experiences.
Childbirth isn't just about the child. It's about the person who gave birth, their lives, their wisdom, and their empowerment.
We're Liz
and Natalie,
the Golden Hour Birth Podcast, and we're here to laugh with you,
cry with you,
and hold space for you. Welcome to the Golden Hour Birth Podcast. I am your co-host, Liz.
And I'm your co-host, Natalie. And tonight we have Alexis from the news channel for Meet St. Louis podcast, and as well as the reporter there.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks so much for coming on today, Alexis.
Thanks for having me. This is fun. It's fun to be on the other side of the microphone.
Yes, so true. So if you want to go ahead and share a little bit about you and your family.
Sure. So yeah, you mentioned I'm a reporter at Channel 4 and the host of our podcast. I have been a reporter for almost 10 years now at Channel 4, which is honestly wild to think. I've been a reporter in general for almost 13 years now, born and raised in St. Louis. So it's been fun to be back in my hometown. And we have an almost 2-year-old little boy, and then we are expecting another little boy this August. So we are going to be a family of 4 very soon, and we're really excited and just kind of looking forward to, welcoming another little baby in the house.
Yeah. So if you want to kind of share a little bit about like when you and your husband started talking about having a baby and then like finding out you were pregnant.
Absolutely. Yeah. For the first time or the second time or both times?
Let's just do first time and then
first time. Sure. Yeah. That makes more sense.
2.
Yeah. That makes more sense. Yeah. So we've been married for, it'll be 4 years this year.
Mm-hmm.
So we always both knew we wanted kids. We sort of hadn't talked about like the when and everything, but there was just like a moment where all of a sudden I was just like, okay, I think now might be the time. I remember talking to my husband about it and he's like, oh, I don't know if we're ready for this. I'm like, I think we are. Like, I think like we're ready. And he's like, okay. And so we were really pretty fortunate that we got pregnant pretty quick. I think like 2 months of trying, and we got pregnant with our son, and it was definitely a surprise, I think, for both of us that it happened so quickly, because you just never know what to expect. You hear these stories, you have friends that, have struggled with infertility and other friends that it happened super fast, and, there's no way of knowing.
No.
So I actually always remember it pretty vividly because, I was like, I don't know, maybe I think I'm pregnant. I took a pregnancy test and it was negative, and I was really disappointed, but we were celebrating my dad's birthday at the wineries. I think it was his 60th or 70th. I don't remember. No, it must have been 70. Sorry, Dad, to age you. And I got a negative test, and I was like pretty bummed. And my sister's like, it's fine. There's always next month, and now we can go to the wineries and enjoy ourselves. I'm like, okay. And so we did. We had a great day at the wineries, and the next day, I still hadn't got my period. I was like, I think I need to take a test again, but I was reading. I was like, but let's do it in the morning. So I'll do it tomorrow morning. And I had envisioned this whole idea of like how I was going to tell my husband that I was pregnant. I had gotten like a really cute, like t-shirt that said hockey mom, because my husband's a huge hockey fan. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to put that on and it'll be a cute thing. But I got up at like 5 a.m. to take the test because it was like, I couldn't get it out of my head. Yeah. And I took it, and he was like in the shower getting ready for work. And I literally just like walked in the bathroom carrying the pregnancy stick. I'm like, he's like, what? I'm like, I don't know. Look at it. And we were both just like kind of standing there. He's like, but we just spent all day at the winery the other day. I'm like, I know. But my doctor assured me it's fine, And then it's one of those things where, I don't know, you just like don't know what you're supposed to do. I'm like, so do I call my doctor?
Yeah,
like, what do I do in that moment? I'm like, I guess I'll wait until they open at 9 and I'll call the doctor and be like, hey, so I'm pregnant. And it's like, I don't know. I was 32 at the time. Yes, 32 at the time. And it's still sort of this feeling of like pregnant, even though like I'm married, I'm 32. It's like totally cool if I'm pregnant right now. We were trying to get pregnant. And so, yeah, we found out really early and had a really easy pregnancy the first time around. Like, honestly, I didn't know what to expect the whole time, but it was a pretty easy pregnancy.
Oh, that's good. Good.
Yeah.
So if there's anything else from pregnancy, we can jump.
Sure. Well, I mean, yeah, I feel like it is interesting doing like this the second time around. I'm 32 weeks now. And I feel like it's a vastly different pregnancy in terms of just like nerves and anxiety. I felt like I was super anxious my whole first pregnancy, just like reading every single thing I could get my hands on, between the apps and the books. And I'm a big person on reading things anyway. And so I definitely think I just kind of dove in. And plus I was pregnant during COVID, which made things even scarier and just kind of unknown. And, everything was just kind of weird.
One day they'd be like, you can't get the vaccine.
Yes.
And the next day they're like, go get the vaccine today.
Yeah.
And like, what the
that was exactly my experience, because I remember, when they sort of talked about the vaccine was coming, and at that point I was gonna be like, no, pregnant people can't get it. And all my friends were like, yeah, sorry, Lex, like you're going to be the one sitting outside that can't go in all the places that are going to require the vaccine. I was like, okay. And then all of a sudden it was going to be like, oh, pregnant people can actually be on the top of the list. So I ended up being, one of the first people of all the people I knew to get it. And so, it was a super weird time. There were so many more unknowns than come with a typical pregnancy, but we navigated our way through. And this time around, I'm just like, I like barely look at the app. I like never know what size fruit this baby is supposed to be. But the first time around, I was like taking the weekly bump pictures and was like always like, oh, he's an apple this week, or, whatever he was. Yeah. So it's very interesting kind of going through that second time around. But the first I was definitely anxious. And even like before every doctor's appointment or ultrasound would just be this like ball of nerves of like, is everything gonna be okay?
Yeah.
And thankfully it was, everything was always really, everything went normal and on track. And we, he was born June 25th of 2021. I had to think about the year for a second. You want me to dive into the birth?
Yeah.
Okay. So my due date was June 21st. And I was always like, oh, it's going to be so fun. I'll have like a summer solstice baby. And so it was the week before he was born was like an insane heat wave. It was like 100 degrees every day. And I had planned to work up until like the Friday before my due date. My due date was a Monday. My plan had been like, I'm going to work until that Friday and then, have my baby on Monday or whenever he decides to come. And the Wednesday night before that, it was so hot. I was at work. I was like, I am too miserable. I think I'm having contractions. Like, this baby is coming. This is going to be my last day of work. Told work, I was like, I got to go. I'm not even going to be live at 10. Like, see you in 3 months. Thinking like, I feel like these are maybe, and that's the other thing that no one talks about. Like, I have no idea what contractions feel like.
Mm-hmm.
You like have no idea until like they're happening. And even then, like, is this what we're talking about? Is this what they do in movies? Like, I don't know. And so I went home and, told my husband, I was like, I don't know. And I think we had our doctor's visit was the next day, I guess it was maybe our 40 week or 39 week. I don't remember how that would have worked. We had a doctor's visit the next morning. Yeah. And so I get in and I'm like, I think we're getting ready to have this baby. They're like, no, you're not. Like, it's not coming right now. Like, you're not having, contract. You're fine. I was like, oh, okay. Well, I think I'm really ready. So like, let's get me like a date to be induced. Like, can we get induced tomorrow? And they're like, no. You and every other woman would like to be induced right now because it's 100 degrees outside. So the soonest is next Wednesday. So we were talking like a full 6 days. I'm like, what? Okay. And I remember telling my husband, being like, no, like, let's just like try to get induced tomorrow. And he's like, are we ready? Are we ready? I'm like, no, we're not. We're not going to be ready next week any more than we're going to be ready tomorrow. But then when they told us, next Wednesday is the soonest you can come in for an induction, I was like, well, could the baby come on his own this weekend? They're like, well, absolutely. But he could also come in a week. And I'm like, okay. And for me, as like someone who plans a lot and is just like a very big planner, that was so stressful. Like, not just having any concept of like, this baby could come tomorrow or this baby could come a week from tomorrow. And that unknown was just like wild to me of like, nope, we don't know. There's no way of knowing. And to me, I always think about, well, 1,000 things about being pregnant. It's just how much we don't know, even still, so many thousands of years after people have been giving birth. And there's just like, we don't know. And I just constantly feel like if, men had babies, we would know everything and we'd have this predicted down to a science.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so that whole weekend, I don't even remember what we did, but I was just like, okay, this baby could come any moment. And I kept hoping like, okay, well, he'll come on his own. Like, and my husband will laugh, but I always like to tell this story because I remember one of our first doctor's visits, we were at MOBAP, where it's where our doctor is. And we lived in Shaw at the time. And my husband was like, okay, so like, but when the baby comes, like, we'll just probably like go to Barnes. I'm like, no, we go to our doctor. And he goes, well, the baby will be coming. And so we like got to go to the nearest hospital. I'm like, it's not like the movie. It's not going to just like fly out of me. Like we have time to, to drive 20 minutes to MOBAP. Like I promise. He goes, well, okay. I'm like, we go to where the doctor is. This is the doctor that's been seeing us this whole time. And it's funny. I was actually telling that to a friend and he's like, don't tell that story. It makes me sound silly. I'm like, no, it doesn't. Like it shows how much we don't know until you're in that moment of how this is all going to go down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we, like I said, I don't remember what we did that weekend. Baby was not coming on his own. So Wednesday, my induction was scheduled for like 10:30 p.m. Which they're like, no, you really want a late night one because, things will get moving and overnight and then you'll have your baby in the morning and it'll be great. So like that whole day. And I was doing all the things. I was like curb walking and trying all the little, sitting on my ball the whole time and nothing was happening. And so that night rolls around like 8 p.m. and I get a call from the hospital. They're like, we are swamped. So we can't get you in. We'll call you tomorrow. We have no idea like when. We're just like crazy busy. I'm like, okay. They're like, so just go to sleep and try to get a good night's rest. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll try that.
Got it. For sure.
And so I went to bed and got up. My sister came over in the morning and brought donuts and we all went like on a walk and took the dog. And then I got like a call on the walk from the hospital being like, okay, we can get you in at like 11. Can you get to the hospital at 11? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So like walked home, grabbed our bags. I said bye to my sister because again, COVID time. So it was only going to be my husband that was going to be allowed in the hospital. And we get there and it was all really easy. I had actually the only other bad part during my pregnancy was I was in 2 separate car accidents while I was pregnant. Yeah. One time somebody stopped in the middle of the highway and there was like no way of stopping and I crashed into them. That was when I was probably 6 months pregnant or so and maybe 7 months. Everything was fine. But of course I had to go to the hospital and get triaged and everything else. And then, like a month later, somebody ran a red light and hit my mom and me in her car. I was fine. She was a little banged up because it was on her side. And I remember telling the, ambulance guy, the EMTs, I was like, I'm fine. I just need to sit down and like breathe and like make sure I'm feeling my baby and everything. And they're like, there's like 1,000 things. I'm like, I live down the street. Like, I'm just going to go home. My dad came and like brought me home and he's like, well, you still need to call your doctor. I'm like, I'm fine. I'm fine. He's like, call the doctor. So I called the doctor and my doctor's like, Alexis, of course you have to come in. You're like 8 months pregnant. And you were just in a car accident. Like, yes, you have to come in. Everything was fine.
Yeah.
But of course it was like the same nurse the second time too. And she's like, are you back here for another car accident? I'm like, yes, totally separate.
Yeah.
Anyway, so when I went in for my induction, they were like, oh, you're the car accident girl. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to be that girl. So the nurses were super sweet and had already met them. It was nice because I had gotten to see the room because prior to that, we weren't able to like see anything because it was COVID. And it's like, I didn't know where you even went in the hospital to like have your baby. So that was, I guess, a little silver lining of the car accidents was that I got this like opportunity to see the rooms and stuff like that. So anyway, we got there and, got in the room and got my gown and, you're just like looking around at all the things and trying to like think how it all went. But yeah, so I think we got there like 11, got into the room probably around noon and started the Pitocin sometime around there. And I always remember it was around like 6 7:00-ish that I decided to get an epidural. I felt like I was fine, but the nurse was like, okay, but I'm just going to let you know if you want one, it's about to be shift change and it could be a while if you decide like you want one later. And I'm like, okay, well, I already knew I was going to get an epidural. That was like 100% always going to be in my plan. And so I was like, okay, let's go ahead and get that going. And the other problem was, this is good advice for people, was that the only thing I had eaten was those donuts that my sister had brought over in the morning. And all of a sudden I was like, I can't just like sustain on donuts for like the next, gosh knows how long this is going to take. And called my, had them ask my doctor, like, can she eat anything? Because, they say you can't. And they let me eat off like the white menu. And I like had, like white bread with a piece of turkey on it or cheese. I guess they let me have turkey. And I don't know, like a juice or something. I don't even remember, but something really sad and like this is not a delicious thing to eat, but I can't sustain on donuts. So eat something healthy and sustainable before you are heading to the hospital is always good advice. Yeah. But yeah, so then, got my epidural, and it's funny. I can always look back because we had a group chat going with my mom and my sisters and my husband during all this. So I have like the timestamps like in that group chat of things. So got the epidural and it went fine. That was always kind of one of the things that scared me was that epidural. Like I was like, how big is this needle going to be? Like, what's that going to be like? And it wasn't fun, but it wasn't as horrible, I think, as I had pictured in my mind.
Yeah. Thankfully, you can't see it.
Yes. Thankfully, it was back there. They did struggle a little bit. They also really struggled to get my IV.
I hate that part.
So they had like 3 different people have to come in and do the IV. So that was not fun, to be poked and prodded like that. But then everything was fine. And then we were just kind of like chilling, waiting for things to happen. My husband like slept on the couch for a little bit. I couldn't really sleep. I was just like, a ball of nerves. I remember, I don't know, I think I watched Mission Impossible on my husband's laptop. And then all of a sudden I got really nauseous, which again, no one had really told me that was going to be a potential side effect. And I just puked like centimeters from my husband's laptop. And I like woke him up with like, Matt. And he's like, what? I was like, well, first I was just puked on your laptop and, but it's okay. But can you call a nurse? Like, what's happening? And so thankfully, like, they're like, oh, this is totally normal. Like, so they were super sweet. And then I sort of feel like things kind of started moving and, getting going. And again, this is where I feel like it's all sort of a blur of what happens. And then our one nurse was so wonderful. She came in with like the peanut ball and we changed positions a lot. And I was definitely progressing. And I guess, sort of more in that active labor. Until, gosh, I don't know, around, it was probably around like 3 a.m. was when this was all sort of like, I felt like really moving along and texting, my family, like, no updates. My mom, it was so sweet. She's like, well, I'm going to shower now. I'm going to just come sit in the parking lot. And we're like, no, it's going to be a while. Like, don't need to come sit in the parking lot. It's going to be a while. My mom's just like so excited. She's like, well, I've showered and I'm ready to come. I'm like, okay. And so, it was several hours of like pretty active, like trying to labor, and it was pretty clear, like baby was not wanting to come out. So like around 6:15, 6 a.m.-ish, I started spiking a fever. And so they got worried about that. And they're like, okay, we're going to go get your doctor, see what she says. And our wonderful nurse was just like, I just want to like let you know that she might come in here and recommend a C-section. And I had done a lot of research on C-sections and like had talked to my doctor about, like what's your kind of like protocol? Like when will you recommend one? When like will you push for one? And she's like, only if it's like you and baby are in danger. It's the only time. She's like, I'm going to let you go as long as you want to, unless there's like a point of danger. Mm-hmm. And so I was super glad that I had that conversation, because when that nurse like said that, all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, like, that wasn't in the back of my mind. Like I had that conversation with her, but I also had not looked anything up about C-sections. Like I think I saw one little thing in the book and I was like, I'm going to skip that. Like that looks frightening. I don't want to look at that. So, my husband and I kind of look at each other like, oh my God, okay. Like we weren't really prepared for that. And at this point I'm also like really exhausted. Because I'd essentially been up all night and I'd been laboring for a long time. And so the doctor came in and they checked and they basically just tell like he was just not coming past like my pelvis essentially. Like they could, for a longest time they could like feel his hair and like feel his head, but he just like wasn't coming out. So the doctor came in and she's like, yeah, we're going to have to do a C-section. I'm really worried about your fever. I'm worried about the baby. So we're going to do this. And I said, okay. And then I like started to panic a little bit. Called my mom and then panicked a lot more when I talked to my mom. And she's like, it's fine. She's like, your aunt's had C-sections, your friends have had C-sections. It's going to be fine. But then it just happens so fast. Yeah. And I remember I was trying to think the other day, like what jewelry I still had on, because I do remember like my husband taking like a piece of my jewelry. I'm like, where are you going to put that? Like, where, like put that in my wallet so I don't lose that. And then they, like are wiping you down with like whatever anti something. And it just, there's all of a sudden all these people around. And I had said very early on, like when we got there that like I was not going to wear a mask during my birth. Like I didn't want to meet my baby in a mask. And they gave me a COVID test and I was like, I'm not going to wear a mask. And I remember no one ever made me put a mask back on in the operating room, which I don't know if that's normal or not, because now I look back and like everybody else is in a mask and I wasn't, or maybe I had one that was on my chin. I don't know. The whole thing is kind of a blur. And I think that's when my husband started freaking out too, was like, okay, you're going to like have surgery right now. And so they roll me into the ER. And again, thankfully my doctor, who I've been going to her since I was 16. So I've known her forever. And, we get in there and I'm on the table and it's just like, it's kind of this like surreal experience of like, this isn't how you imagined your birth was going to go, but it's happening. And I felt like, it was so fast. And I remember, they, move you out from the bed into the table and, all of a sudden they're like cutting you open and you can like feel that like tugging. Yeah. That's sort of what I remember, that sensation. And then, it was like seconds later and here's my baby, like here's Nolan. And it's just, I'm so thankful for the anesthesiologist who said, okay, Dad, now's the time to snap some photos. And he did. And they're all live. And so I like not only can like see it, but like if you like hold them all down and like my husband did a great job. He just like snapped away. So we've got like him literally being like lifted out of my body. But I was shaking like uncontrollably from the anesthesia, I guess. And so I like whispered to him, I was like, don't let anyone give me that baby. Like I can't hold the baby. Like, your arms are kind of spread out. Like I'm doing this right now. Like anybody can see me. Kind of like you're on like sounds like Jesus on the cross. And I remember thinking that I'd like to hold the baby right after, but I knew I physically couldn't. So they, cleaned him up and my husband cut the cord. And then all of a sudden my husband's like holding him next to me. And I'm just like, you have a baby in your hand. And like, they're sewing me up. And the whole thing is just such like a surreal experience. Mm-hmm. And then I guess I'm back on the bed and then I'm holding my baby once I'm back in the bed. And the other thing that I always think about is like they roll me back into our room and me and my husband, and then they just leave. And me and my husband are just like there with this baby. And I'm like, like, what am I supposed to do with it? Like no one tells you really, or maybe they did. And I just was so out of it. Yeah. I remember I was like, okay, I think we're supposed to do chest, skin to skin. So like, let me take off this gown thing. And at that point I was more secure in like holding him because I was like, kind of in the bed. But it's wild to like think about how fast it all happened. And then all of a sudden there he was and he was perfect and amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, let me think what to do after I just had major abdominal
right.
surgery.
Yeah. And I was obviously still like numb waist down and, Yeah, that part, I don't really remember a lot of that. I do remember looking back at the text and again, I'm so thankful for this random group chat because, we had told my mom, hey, she's going to have a C-section. Matt, I guess Matt's my husband, said, hey, we've got a baby. He's here. He's 8 pounds, 7 ounces. And somebody in the, really? Then look at that. It's a good size. But somebody, I think it was my sister, like, oh, yep, that makes sense. Maybe that's why I didn't want to come out because it's a big baby. And so my mom was like, I'm going to come now. And my husband's like, hey, we're going to be like in this room for a little bit before they discharge us and go into whatever the next room is called. So like, Kath, just chill.
Yeah.
It's going to be a minute. But yeah, we were just kind of in that like, oh my God, we have a baby moment. And none of that really registers in my brain, actually. And probably because I was on, drugs from my C-section. But, it wasn't what I was expecting, but it also went totally fine, which was good. So I was grateful of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How was recovery and postpartum from there?
It was hard in the hospital. I mean, like, I remember, like, that pain was pretty bad. Mm-hmm. And I do remember being thankful, again, that my husband was kind of aware of that and definitely was like, look, you need to ask the nurses to up your meds because you were in so much pain. And so we did that. And, the hospital part was easy. I mean, in that sense, like, we had one nurse that was not super kind, and I hope I never see her again. But we, it was one of those things where it was just, they're waking, you're like up every hour essentially because they're checking on you and then they're checking on baby. And we finally were like, hey, do you could like meld these times up? Like, we, like instead of every hour, it's every 3 hours for me and every 3 hours for baby. Could we like make those on the same schedule? And I remember, the second night we had, we were grateful that there was like a lactation specialist that came in, kind of helped me figure out. Cause again, of the so many videos and books that I watched about breastfeeding, I'm like, I still have, what am I doing? Yeah. Like, what is happening here? How is this baby feeding from me? And so there was a lactation specialist who was super great, came in, helped us out, hands in there, like helped me out. And I was like, okay, we got this. And I think it was the second night. Must have been the second night. I can't remember. But second night, we were like, okay, well, maybe Matt was like, let's send the baby for the nursery for a couple hours so you can just get some, like a couple hours of sleep. I was like, okay, all right, let's do that. And he wasn't latching well. And so he's like, let's just let him get some sleep, let you get some sleep. So the nurse took him and, I guess I closed my eyes and all of a sudden the nurse is back, like, I don't know, maybe an hour later. And she's like, he's starving. He needs to eat. And I'm like, okay, like, let's feed him. And so I'm trying and he's not latching and he's screaming and I'm crying. And I was like, what am I supposed to do? She's like, well, he's hungry. I'm like, clearly, obviously that's something. I was like, well, what am I like? Can you help? And she's like, well, he needs formula. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But like, also, do you think you could like help me? And she's like, he needs formula. My husband was like, okay, great. So he needs formula. That's fine. What does that even mean? Like, she's like, well, we have this, this, and this. And he goes, we have literally no idea. You're the nurse. Let us know what he should take. And so she comes in and, brings the little mini bottles. And I'm like crying at this point because I'm like feeling like, oh, I'm already failing. I'm going to cry. But, it was just like, and we were already been like, we're okay with formula. Like, it's fine. We're going to do whatever, like, my body and this baby want to do. But in that moment, it was just this, like, horrific, like, middle of the night, sleep deprivation. What are we doing?
Down on you.
Yeah. And so when we gave them in, the baby took the formula and Nolan was fine and he was happy. And then I was like, okay, this is fine. But it was like, now looking back and like after telling a couple of other friends and like another friend who's a nurse, she's like, what happened? Like, that is like the last thing that ever should have happened.
Yeah.
But again, we had thankfully talked about a lot of things. We were okay using formula. We wanted to definitely breastfeed. That was my plan going forward. What we were, a lot of the whole process for us was like, I'm not going to put any pressure on myself or on the baby. Like, we have like ways we'd like to do things, but I'm not going to let it become this point of stress that, you know, is detrimental to me and or baby.
Yeah.
So that was helpful to have already had those kind of conversations. So we weren't at least making that like, wait a second, do we want to do formula in the middle of the night on night 2 of baby's life? So I feel like the next day things went better. And, you know, I think the lactation specialist came back again and helped us, you know, get a better grasp on it. And again, I think it was just that he was like too far gone hungry, like that.
Crying.
Yeah. So he wasn't going to latch. But the rest of the hospital stay was fine. And it was kind of weird because, again, we could only have like one visitor a day. And so like my mom came the first day, my mother-in-law came the second day, and my sister came the third day. And then we were discharged and went home, and things went pretty well. I mean, that's also, my goodness, such a blur, that sort of first couple of weeks of newborn life. Like I said, I've had a couple friends that are all having babies this summer, and they're all in it. And I'm just like right now trying to like remember, what are we doing for those days and nights where nothing makes sense and you're just like sleep deprived. And then I'm going to have the second time around a toddler to contend with. But things went pretty well. I felt like breastfeeding went really well for a while. Maybe like 2 weeks in is I developed mastitis, and which was horrific. Again, nothing I'd ever been sort of warned about or told about. And I just like developed this like insane fever one day. We were like going to my dad's house, and all of a sudden I'm in the car and I'm like shivering. I'm like, I have a fever. And he's like, my husband's like, what? How would you have a fever? I'm like, I don't know. But like, I didn't take a temperature. And my husband went and bought a thermometer, and I had like 104 fever all of a sudden. And you know, my doctor kind of was like, okay, you know, it sounds like it's probably mastitis. Like, here's what we're going to do. Here's some medication, you know, here's the steps. And then I got it a second time as well, which was like even like worse and more painful. And we saw a lactation specialist who I think helped, and, you know, I didn't get it again. But again, it was sort of remembering to kind of just like take that pressure off myself of, which then also maybe led to some of the mastitis if I wasn't breastfeeding enough. And, you know, it's like one of those things where now my husband even asked the other day, he's like, what are we going to do to not have that again? And I was like, I don't know. At least I know now that that's something that can happen. And at least I can be better prepared and talk to my doctor ahead of time. Like, hey, what should I be doing differently this time around to make sure that doesn't happen? And, but other than that, it was pretty good. You know, my son was always a really easy baby. Like, he slept pretty well. He ate pretty well. And it was just like a very chill little kid, which has carried on to his toddler years, which is nice.
I feel like your husband was like really supportive in that moment of like this nurse.
Yeah.
Being like, just, you know.
Yeah. Like, hey, all right, just give, thankful. I'm so thankful
sure.
that he like stepped in. And
Yeah.
I'm really grateful that I have a very supportive husband who, you know, read the baby books. And, you know, because again, COVID times, we couldn't take any classes. So we watched a couple of things online, and, you know, he was always right there beside me, even though some of them he's like, whoa, what are we doing here? I don't know, actually. I'm not sure either.
We're in this together.
So, yeah. So I've always been lucky that he, you know, has taken on, you know, a really hands-on approach, and was always fantastic in those early months or early days, early weeks. You know, he'd handle the dishes and any bottles and washing the pump parts. And another friend of ours is about to have their first, and he was telling like her husband, like, yeah, this is the one thing you can do. Like, you can't breastfeed, you know, there's a lot you can't do, but like you can take that like load off for mom of, you know, doing the bottles, making sure the trash is out, and making sure there's snacks around, and that she's got water, you know, while she's breastfeeding. Yeah. So little things like that really do make such a difference.
Yeah. That's really sweet.
Had you guys talked about that before?
We hadn't really. I think I had got him like a dad book, and I think a lot of that was in there, which is good. But no, he really took like an initiative of like, and the other thing that I think is so important to remember is sometimes they don't know, and like they don't know what to do. I mean, we don't know what to do either. But in that moment of, okay, the thing that would really help me right now is to make sure that I don't have to wash a bottle like after I've breastfed and then I'm pumping. And, I don't want to have to then go wash, the pump parts and stuff like that. So I think making sure that like sometimes we communicate like what we need, or which is also equally annoying sometimes to like have to say like, here's what I need. Like,
Not
it's like, I just
every time.
want you to know,
Yeah.
just read my mind.
I literally told that to my husband the second time around. I was like, just read my mind.
Right? Seriously. I mean, like all the time. I mean, that's like, I feel like that's a marriage thing in general. I'm like, I just want you to know what I'm feeling right now, where I want to eat tonight, because I don't know where I want to eat. So I need you to just get into my mind and let me know myself.
Exactly.
Yeah, you remember my orders from food places.
Right?
Just
go get that. Just that's what I'm gonna want probably. But yeah, it'll be definitely interesting the second time around of just kind of like how that plays in. And one thing I think I'm a little like worried about is just like losing out on that time with my toddler while I'm taking care of baby. And I know that that's something that like my husband can definitely sort of, make sure that toddlers, entertained while I'm in that kind of like newborn fog and breastfeeding and things like that. But I'm sure that'll be like a hard part too of like, well, they're probably out having fun and I'm in this like dark room nursing, So lots of things that are like mentally going through my mind as I start to get much closer to welcoming a new baby.
Yeah. Yeah. And the seasons, they shift so much that like now that my kids are a little older, now it's like I'm my older one's favorite. And he, like my younger daughter, is just like all about them and they go do special things together.
Yeah.
So like it flips a lot.
I always have to remember that flipping happens, and because my toddler is definitely in a all dad phase right now, all dad all the time. And I'm like, there was a time where you really didn't even like him. Like, dad had to like wrap my shirt around him so that, like you would like settle on his chest. So we'll see. And that's the thing. Like every baby is so different. Like every birth is so different. And even though, my one went this way, like I have just no idea what to expect for the second.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild.
That's one of the big themes of our podcast is just like you don't know and you have to be ready to pivot at a moment's notice and roll with the punches.
Right.
Yeah.
And which is just, again, it's just kind of wild. This like thing that half of our population essentially does. And there's just it's still so unpredictable.
Yeah.
It's just kind of an insane concept to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Did anything ever come of the fever while you were in labor?
No, I don't, I think they said, I forget what they said about it. And they did check there was something that they wanted to double check on, they like, there was the word NICU was tossed around. I remember that like first 24 hours and nothing ended up happening. He was fine, but there was, and now again, it was nothing that ended up being, so I don't even remember. But there was like, well, we just want to make sure everything's fine because you did have this fever. But no, I think it was just that I had labored so long or something. There was some reason I got a fever, but yeah, they don't really know. But during my C-section, my doctor was like, this baby was never coming out that way. She's like, my interior pelvis is apparently very narrow, which is not something I guess they really realized, which is kind of crazy because I have very large hips. Like it's just like one of those things where it's just like I've like always, it's like, oh, you have the baby making hips. Well, apparently they aren't there. They're not that way always. So so she had said that, as when we were doing that C-section, she's like, no, this baby was not going to come out that way. And the other thing that like I always think about too is I remember telling my sister that, and my sister's like, so like 100 years ago, like what would have happened? I'm like, well, I guess one of us would have died. Like, I mean, that's like kind of the crazy thing when you have to think about that kind of stuff. And I'm very grateful for modern medicine and the ability that, that both me and my son were, out of that operating room very safely. But it is kind of wild to think about. And, I think that, again, the C-section was never something that I ever thought that was going to be my sort of birth experience. But I also didn't have like any issue with it. I don't feel like I had any less of a birth experience. I don't feel like I missed like a moment with my son by having him be a C-section. And so it's interesting how sometimes when I read things or hear other people's experiences, and everyone has a different experience and you can't control what other people think, but I'm always just like, I don't feel like I'm any less of a mom because I had a C-section, which sometimes you read like this like cryptic language of C-sections. I'm like, but let's just like not, I think we can all understand that there's things that we can do better to ensure that the C-section rate is lower, but it doesn't make it any less of a birth experience. So,
and it's not like you ever knew about your
I'm like, but also like pelvis. I'm like, but like, why also don't we know that? Like, like, why isn't that something we know? And so it is interesting because now my doctor and I have talked about it this time around. And like I said, I have a C-section scheduled, but we just had our 32-week appointment for this baby, and he's much smaller than Nolan was at this time. And so I had said, so could we maybe do a VBAC this time? And she said, we can definitely talk about it. Like, let's see how you're progressing. I definitely want to take another look at your pelvis situation. She's like, I want to take a look at my notes from your last birth, see what the situation was. But she's like, if it works out, like, I'm definitely willing to try. So, but now all of a sudden that was not a thought in my head. So that's now a new thought. I'm like, wait, oh God, what are we going to do this again? So I don't know.
Yeah.
To be determined how that all plays out. TBD.
That takes a lot of planning too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I wasn't even thinking, like, I wasn't planning that. Like, I was just like, okay, I was told we're having a C-section this time around. And in my mind, I know now what to expect for that. And there is a little, like, there is a weirdness of like planning your child's birthday, essentially, like with picking the date for your C-section. Which is funny because it's the day before my birthday, actually, is when it's set. So I'm going to get a baby for my birthday. But it is also, there is sort of that comfort of, okay, well, we're having a baby on this day, unless he comes early, I guess, would be the other option. But
that's like the nice part for childcare. Like,
I know, I was going to say.
Got somebody for Nolan.
Right, exactly. We'll know, hey, we're going to need you this day.
Not a middle of the night phone call.
Exactly.
For me, I had the call. My mom was my person. She didn't answer.
So no.
I called Natalie. She came over.
Yeah.
Luckily she was awake because she was pregnant.
and pee.
Oh. Makes sense, right? Oh my God. Yeah. No, that is a wild thought, sort of. We've talked about that. I was like, okay, well, I guess Nolan will sleep over, and my sister's already said, well, I'll get the dog, and so I guess we can plan a little bit more this time around. But
does your sister have any kids? I'm like,
no, she's getting married next summer, so hopefully soon babies will have cousins.
Yeah. I was like wondering if like she ever had anything. Like
I know. Well, no, we don't know. Yeah. So, but I'll be curious because we're pretty similar.
Yeah.
Like bodies, and so it'll be interesting to kind of see how that all plays out.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Again, it was weird to me that like, why isn't there something we can like see in an ultrasound or like know? But I guess if you're not looking for it, maybe I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, if this baby's smaller, then
maybe he'll come out that way. Yeah. I don't know. Or like we can, and that's what I said. I'll be interested to talk to my doctor more about it. She was rushing into emergency surgery actually during my visit yesterday. And so I'll be interested to kind of talk more about it and kind of like read a little, because now I'm like, oh my gosh, I should better read more about VBACs now and like things like that. And maybe I should start doing a little bit more stretching.
There's a really good podcast called the VBAC Link.
Oh, really? Oh, good. I'll have to check that out.
Listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, awesome.
Cool. Do you have any advice for new moms?
I mean, again, I think, and I really try to take this with all parts of being a mom, is to try to relax a little bit. It's super hard because, again, I think about a lot of my anxiety and so much now I think back of those like first postpartum months, and I definitely had postpartum anxiety and didn't realize it. Like, I think there's so much of that you just like think you're nervous because you're like all of a sudden caring for this tiny baby. But I can remember constantly stopping to check the car seat to make sure that the baby was breathing in the back. And like, I remember reading something like, that's postpartum anxiety. I'm like, oh, Oh, okay. That makes sense. Okay. So it's easy to say like relax and chill when so much of it is out of your control. But I do think trying to have that mindset of, people do this every day. Like you are going to get through this. This baby, really only needs a few actual things, needs to be fed, needs to be diapered, needs to be loved. So many of the other gadgets and gizmos we don't really need. Which is the other thing that's interesting, sort of the second time around. I mean, we've bought nothing. This baby is like, this baby has no room yet. Like, it's all going to happen. It'll be fine. It'll be good. But I think that trying to go in with that mindset of trying to calm yourself and your husband and your partner and your child, like not to stress too much about the way other people's experiences are, whether it's your birth or those early days or how your maternity leave goes, and trying not to do that comparison game, I think also can help sort of like ease that mindset. And I do think, it's interesting talking about it now, which I hadn't thought about, was having some of those conversations. Everyone talks about like, oh, do you have a birth plan? And I remember when I asked my doctor, I'm like, okay, so like, let's talk about a birth plan. She was, Alexis, your birth plan is we're going to have this baby healthy. You're going to be healthy. Baby's going to be healthy. Like, that's the birth plan. I'm like, okay, I like that. I like that, So having had that conversation with my doctor about C-sections and having some of those conversations with my husband about like, how do we feel about formula? Like, what do we want to do? I do think makes some of those moments that can be really pretty panic inducing because you're like sleep deprived and the baby's screaming and you're crying a little bit easier. Because you are, at least whether you're on the same page or you've at least looked at the page together, can be a little bit of a helpful experience. So I would say those are kind of my bits of advice.
Yeah. I love that. So yeah. Really good at like just taking a look at it together.
Yeah. And again, I think that talking, I mean, again, there's a lot that's just on mom, there's a lot just on the birthing person. But, your partner, if you have one, is hopefully there to be that partner with you along the way. And, some partners are better than others and, but I'm grateful that I have a partner that really was there in those kind of pretty high tense moments. And even when, they're not because they're asleep and you're up in the middle of the night breastfeeding and there's a lot of like random loneliness, even though all of a sudden you're like constantly attached to like another human being, which is kind of like this weird concept. But kind of having those people to lean on. And we were so grateful that we had my sisters and my mom and my mother-in-law, and everyone was just, I don't know how we'd do it if we lived in a city away from everybody else. So finding that support system is the other big piece, I would say. Because even just the little things of like somebody coming over and like bringing you a sandwich. I remember my best friend from college, like Uber Eats a Starbucks, like a cup of coffee to my doorstep one day. Like it probably cost 6 times what that cup of coffee should have cost. But like that was just like the sweetest little thing. Yes. So, and I will say as a mom now, anytime I have friends that are pregnant, I'm like, okay, I'm sorry that I like didn't know what I should be doing, but like, here's what I know now. And it's like food, coffee, like little things like that can help. So they don't, you don't even have to see them. You just put it on their porch or whatever and let them know that you're there. So,
or just sending a text.
Like,
you don't even need to respond, but when you do, just how's it going?
Yeah. Or like, the other thing that I do now that I try to think about is like, hey, I'm at Target. Can I pick you up a thing of diapers? Like not even saying, do you need anything? Because like sometimes it's like, again, that moment of we want other people to like think of what we need for us. Like, let me just say like, hey, I can get you this, this, or this. Like, do you need any of those things? If not, no worries. I'll talk to you later. But I think that like those little things can make such a difference. And also then as a mom, accepting help. Because sometimes we're like, no, we're good. But you need that support system. You need that community to lean on, whether it's your partner, your mom, your dad, your best friends. And so take that help when people are offering it. That would be the other big piece of advice.
Yeah. All very good. Love it. Yeah. Well, wonderful. We'll have to have you on for baby number 2.
Yes. Stay tuned to see what happens.
So where can our listeners find you?
Yeah. So like I said, I'm a reporter at Channel 4. So I'm on the news most nights at 10 p.m. I've got a podcast called the Meet St. Louis Podcast where I interview chefs and brewers and small business owners. We drop new episodes every Monday. And I share a ton of life and mom life on Instagram at Alexis Zotos, where I try to keep it very fun and light and mom events and kid events and fun things around St. Louis. So any of those places.
Wonderful.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for having me and letting me talk about this experience.
Of course. It's our favorite.
All right. We'll see you next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Golden Hour Birth Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion and found it insightful and beneficial. Remember, the Golden Hour Birth Podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you. If you appreciate the content we bring you each week, consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform or sharing the show with your friends and family. Your support helps us reach more people and continue creating valuable episodes. If you have any questions, suggestions, or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us on our website, www.goldenhourbirthpodcast, or connect with us on social media. We value your feedback and want to make sure that we're delivering the content you want to hear. Before we sign off, we'd like to express our gratitude to our incredible guests who joined us today. We are honored that they trust us enough to be so open and vulnerable. We're grateful for their time and willingness to share their stories with us. If you're interested in taking the conversation further with us, join us on our Facebook group, The Golden Hour Birth Circle. We'll be back next week with another exciting episode, so be sure to tune in. Until then, stay golden and remember to take care of yourself. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Golden Hour Birth Podcast. Bye!